Hi, I'm Ken Fisher. Welcome to the 18th season of CityWide. My guest on this edition of CityWide is Carol Kellermann, President of New York City's Citizen Budget Commission. Welcome to CityWide.
Thank you.
Okay, for those who are not familiar with the Citizens Budget Commission, what is that? Is it the government? Should I call you commissioner?
No, it is a non-governmental, non-profit, non-partisan fiscal watchdog on city and state government and policy.
What does that mean? Why does the city need a watchdog?
Well, it's both the city and the state, I should
Okay.
point out, because they are so inextricably related. The job of the commission is to be a voice for the average taxpayer and make sure that our money is wisely and effectively spent. Of course, government agencies should be doing that on their own, but we think it's helpful to have an independent voice watching what's going on and trying to speak up for sane policies.
So, is it really that you're calling balls and strikes on how the city spends its money rather than political issues about what it should be spending it on?
Both. I wouldn't say political issues. I think, as I said, the main goal is to make sure the money is wisely and effectively spent. So we do watch and try to call out misuse, waste, ineffective spending, but we do also make recommendations about how we think that the budget should be operated.
Infrastructure, education,
Yes,
things like that.
yes. We would tend to stay away from getting into how classrooms should be taught. There are other organizations that have more educational expertise, but how teachers should be paid and what the research shows in terms of pay for performance and merit pay and other issues like that, we will discuss.
For decades, city budgeting and state budgeting was based on fiscal gimmicks, one-shots, accounting tricks. And I remember for years it was the Citizens Budget Commission that was Paul Revere. The red ink is coming, the red ink is coming. Has that gotten any better, or is it still a lot of gamesmanship in how the city and state do their budgets?
Well, I would say that the city is under more regulation and can do it less because of the fiscal crisis in the 70s. We are required to have a truly balanced budget every year, and we are required to have a financial plan for the next 4 years that projects so that places like the Citizens Budget Commission and the average taxpayer can see what is coming ahead. The state is not subject to quite the same strictures. They have a financial plan, but they can use a cash budgeting and just kind of push expenses into another year if they don't have the money this year. There is still one-shot budgeting and trying to find ways to look like things are more balanced than they are. It's just we think you can tell more quickly now what's going on than you could many, many years ago.
So some of this, may sound dry to some of our viewers, but it has very real impacts on services. And I want to give an example. It was in the news recently. The city has settled up some labor contracts, teachers union most prominently recently, and there was a issue raised by the city controller, Scott Stringer, about the accounting treatment of that contract. Tell us what that was and what the outcome meant in terms of actual impact on people.
Okay. In 2008 to 10, the city did not resolve its contract with the teachers, but it did with all the other unions. And they all got 2 4% raises, and the teachers did not. So the bottom line now is that many years later, the city is entering a contract with the UFT, and it's going to cover all the way back to 2008 and go all the way through 2018. And they're going to make the teachers whole for the period that everyone else got those raises. And the way they're going to do it is to pay lump sums. And in order to make it affordable, the lump sums are going to be paid out in installments all the way through 2021. So you won't see as much of a budget impact in the current year from having to pay that money out. But they're also going to pay it to anyone who retires, who's already retired or who's going to retire between now and 2021. So those amounts are already spoken for. We have to pay them. If those teachers leave, they're not working through 2021 and getting that money. It's already been spent. And so it's what I say to explain it is, it's kind of like if the mayor and Michael Mulgrew went into a restaurant and they ordered a very nice meal and the check came and they said, okay, we'll pay 75% of the check. We've already eaten the meal. You've already served us. And then in 5 years, whoever comes into the restaurant will pay the rest. We'll spread it out there, okay? So that's basically what the comptroller was saying, is you can't push these expenses into the budget far away when you know you have them now and you're going to pay them now. And so they worked out a compromise in which the mayor is going to account for all the money that's going to have to be paid to retirees, which is probably somewhere between $750 million and $1 billion in this year's budget, because they're going to sign the contract this year.
So let me get this straight. It was an accounting rule that Stringer felt was important for the people to have confidence in the city's budget. And the result of that is that $750 million to $1 billion of money is basically being set aside for that now. Cash put into a special account.
Yes.
This is the money we don't have to worry about.
And we can't spend it on anything else.
So that means that's potentially $1 billion of other things that the city won't be able to to spend this year.
Exactly. And that's the point. You know, when people say, oh, accounting rules, they're just technical. They're based on a principle that is intended to both show taxpayers what the real picture is and make it clear that you're making choices. So yes, this year is 2014. It ends at the end of June. The budget was going to roll an extra $1 billion left over in 2014 into 2015. Now they won't do that. They'll put it in this account to be paid to retirees. So you either don't spend that $1 billion in 2015, or you have to find another place to come up with $1 billion.
When the city, and it's the state true also, but I focus on the city for a minute. We'll talk a little about the state later in the show. When the city wants to build something, they want to build a new school, they want to build perhaps housing and so forth, they borrow money. They go down to Wall Street, they issue bonds that's basically an IOU, and in order for investors, for pension funds, for individuals, et cetera, in effect to lend money to the city, they want to be confident that they're going to get paid back. So the city is rated. Somebody, outside agencies say, you know, this is you're on the right track. You're playing by the rules. You're on the right track, wrong track. Recently, one of those credit agencies said that this labor situation was credit negative, that it was an indication of trouble to come. So should we be concerned about the cost of borrowing going up? If I'm lending to somebody who I know is a good bet, I'll charge them less than I will if somebody that I'm worried I'm going to have to chase for my money. So what does this all mean?
Well, you explained it perfectly. That's what rating agencies are for. They're a bellwether for investors to look at to decide whether they feel comfortable investing in municipal bonds, and it could affect the amount of debt service, but they didn't lower our rating. They said it's a negative, meaning let's watch and see what happens. It's something to look at. the Citizens Budget Commission performs a very similar function. We aren't really tying our warnings to bond ratings or interest rates. We're trying to make it a little bit more accessible to your average citizen. But they were saying the same thing we're saying. This contract it may be a reasonable contract, but the structure of it is that we're going to pay for it for a very long period of time. And when I said we have a 4-year financial plan, a lot of the money in the UFT contract will be paid after the financial plan. So when the budget is presented, we don't even see this in the budget. And that's what they're saying, is this is something to watch. If something goes wrong, if the economy doesn't continue to grow, more importantly, if the healthcare savings that the mayor and the UFT are saying will be used to offset some of the costs aren't realized, then the costs of this are going to be much higher than they seem now, and then we could have a source of concern.
So let me ask you this question. I think for a lot of New Yorkers, whether they like Mike Bloomberg or not, when it came to something like $1 billion, they had confidence in his ability to manage money because he had $1 billion many times over, and few people in government can say that. But he wasn't necessarily a good people person. Bill de Blasio was elected in part because he said that he was going to be a people person, that he was going to be responsive and accessible to residents of the city all over the place. Is Bill de Blasio a good money man?
Too soon to know, but there are some concerns about what we see so far. You know, it's very early. He hasn't really even been in office 6 years. He's never had responsibility.
6 months.
6 months, sorry. He hasn't had responsibility for anything this large. You know, the public advocate's office is very small. And now he's got a $76 billion budget, and he's got a very capable staff at the Office of Management and Budget, but he and his budget director have to learn how to do this and how to communicate.
So is he off to a good start so far as is he saying the right things?
He says the right things. He says that it is possible to have an activist agenda and be fiscally responsible, and that you indeed cannot have an activist agenda if you don't husband your resources effectively so that you can use them for what you need. And he's come and spoken at Citizens Budget Commission and said all of those things. But the prospective raises that he achieved with the UFT are reasonable. And if he can get the same deal with the rest of the unions, they are more than we pay now for personal services, but they're in a manageable amount. But there has been a little bit of a learning curve in terms of transparency and coming forward with all of the information about this contract. We still don't really have the full understanding of the implications of it and when these amounts will be paid. And I think that that gives people concern and a lot of very optimistic assumptions about healthcare savings that will be achieved. And if they're not, then the contracts become much more costly than his initial budget projections indicate.
We're going to talk a little bit more about how government spends its money and how citizens can make sure it's spent wisely when Citywide continues right after this. Welcome back to Citywide. We're speaking with Carol Kellermann, President of the Citizens Budget Commission. Carol, before we turn to the state's financial situation, I want to ask you a sort of a broad question. When the city was in dire straits, businesses were fleeing and tax base was shrinking. I think there was a strong feeling that everybody was in it together. There would be shared sacrifice, and everybody's belt was going to be tightened. Economically, the last 10 years have been very good for New York. And now we have a mayor, and not just a mayor, but a city council and a political movement that says that the residents of the city need more. They need more services, they need higher wages, they need affordable housing, they need a lot of things that government has to provide and that perhaps only government can provide. And if that means that people at the top are paying a little bit more in taxes, or perhaps even a lot more in taxes, that not only is that fair, but that the city has so much momentum behind it that we really don't have to worry about the consequences of it, and we can sort of tilt the scales a little bit differently. What do you think about that?
Very well put. I think that we won't know until it's too late. That we shouldn't take momentum for granted, and that you can hit a tipping point at which you have created such an inhospitable atmosphere for businesses and for people with higher incomes to live that they go. Everybody says there's no evidence. Well, we've never really tried this, and we don't want to get to the point where we conduct an experiment and find out after it's too late that our tax revenue has gone down, that people are not developing and building and growing in the city. So it's a balance, and we just have to be careful about what we do and how we do it. It is true that, yes, there was a spirit of working together when we last had a decline in the city, although I do think there's a lot of nostalgia about the good old days, and I don't know that it seemed quite that way at the time. But we live in a different environment now where people can much more easily pick up and telecommute.
Well, let me ask you about that.
So we have to be careful about that.
So there are new industries, major employers, Google, for example, that have become big employers in the city. But in the recent reports that at least 2, if not 3, banks, everybody's least favorite people these days, but 2 or 3 major financial institutions are considering moving substantial numbers of jobs to Jersey City. And maybe they're bluffing because this is where the talent wants to be, but Bill de Blasio, when he ran for mayor, said that he was not in favor of basically cutting special deals for businesses under those circumstances to hold on to them. On the other hand, the mayor of Jersey City is basically saying, what can I do for you? So is that threat real? Should we be concerned about it? And at the end of the day, is it worth it for one city or one state to basically be creating financial incentives to keep them from going across the river?
It's very tough for political leaders to resist getting into a bidding war. And yes, Mayor de Blasio was very firm in his campaign that he's not going to do that, and he's not going to cut special tax exemption deals. CBC has long expressed skepticism about these deals because you don't have any way to measure whether this particular organization would have moved or not. And they often promise that they're going to keep this many jobs or add that many jobs, and they don't, and you can't go and get the money back. So the way to make New York continue to thrive is not to cut special deals. It's to keep a thriving cultural, infrastructure, educational environment where people want to live and work here, and not to get involved in these types of bidding wars. But it's hard to resist when you see something like that. And yes, people want to live in New York, but Jersey City can be made into sort of a hip new place. It's just across the river. I mean, one of the things that I think people don't think about is that we do not have a non-resident income tax in New York City. We can only tax the people that actually live here, not people who work here and go home to live somewhere else. And so we have to be careful about things that just end at the 5 boroughs, because if we lose those people to move somewhere else, we've lost all of their tax revenue. The state took away the non-resident earnings tax from New York City a while ago, and it really limits the amount that we can do. All of the issues you talked about, affordable housing, the minimum wage, these are all very valid concerns. The question is, how much of them can the city, just the municipality of the city, resolve on its own, and how much are they statewide problems and even more federal problems, so that you don't get into a situation where states and localities are competing with each other, where we figure out how to lift the economy of the entire country.
Well, let's talk about the state of New York. Andrew Cuomo, from a proud liberal tradition and an activist when it comes to government, virtually from his first day in office, has insisted that he was going to be a governor who held the line on taxes and reduced them whenever he could. Has he kept that promise to New Yorkers?
He's been a very fiscally responsible governor in many respects. He's lowered, not lowered, but flatlined pensions for the state and localities. He got very good wage settlements with the public employee union so that he has kept the cost of state government it's still growing, but on a relatively modest growth path. He did lower taxes for a large majority of New Yorkers, and he didn't raise them, but he removed a surcharge on higher income New Yorkers part way, so that, he says they're the lowest taxes in 58 years.
He's also been pushing local governments to restructure themselves so that their property taxes
Yes,
don't
and
go up.
he imposed a cap on property taxes, which seems to have been largely effective. Very few localities are adopting budgets above his 2% property cap. Many localities claim that this is imposing very serious burdens on their school systems. But you have to remember, he's also very optimistic, and he is now saying that there are going to be surpluses in New York State government over the next few years. And that is only the case if there is very, very stringent cost control on many aspects of state government, and he has not specified how those controls will be imposed, and only if this income tax surcharge, this lowered but still existing income tax surcharge, is retained. And it's going to expire, and I don't really see how you can continue state government at the rate that it is now being funded without extending that surcharge.
On the other hand, he's also been an advocate of using the state's Empire State Development Corporation and these regional councils that he's created to give targeted breaks to particular industries or particular locations. And his Startup New York program essentially declares that businesses that work in, near, and around and with certain designated universities will become tax-free zones. Are these smart innovations, or are these just political, opportunities for him to say that he's doing something?
Too soon to tell. He eliminated the Empire Zone program, not he, the legislature, and he.
What was that?
And that was another attempt to target distressed areas and encourage businesses to move into them and to give them tax breaks. It just over time turned into a huge boondoggle where everything was an Empire Zone and every kind of business could get these credits, whether they were bringing new jobs or not. So it was encouraging to see that program go away. But then he created the Excelsior program and Startup New York and the Regional Economic Development Councils. And there is a concern that these things are really all turning into another form of what we had with the Empire Zones. The Startup New York program, we haven't seen any results yet. So we will want to see what businesses actually are attracted to these areas and who they give these tax exemptions to. But I have to say that telling a business that you are literally tax-free for 10 years, and that's giving them freedom from not only state taxes, but the localities' taxes, and that the employees don't have to pay personal income tax at all, is kind of a bad precedent. I find that kind of alarming, that you're going to have two people who live next door to each other, one of whom pays no income taxes, even though they live in New York State, simply because of the particular business they work in, and the other one does pay. I think that's not good policy.
So one of the comments that sometimes gets made about the Citizens Budget Commission is that it is a group of elite New Yorkers, that your board is made up of high-level professionals, people from finance and real estate and a bunch of other fields, but that we're now in an era where citizen participation is important, that it's not 50 people going into a room and solving the fiscal crisis of New York, but now through the use of social media and otherwise, it might be 50,000 people who are debating an issue of the day. If the average New Yorker wants to get involved in this discussion, if the average New Yorker wants to dig into some of these deep policy issues that have such an impact on people's lives, how can they do that?
Well, we are a content provider, and it is true that our members are a small, or relatively small, it's about 150 group of, yes, citizens who have the resources to be members of CBC, but they are concerned New Yorkers, and they are from all of the sectors of the economy that have a stake in New York. Sometimes the people on our membership don't agree with a particular position that we may take, but they think that it is important that some organization be speaking up for the common interest and pointing out inconvenient truths. So our job is to make information available. Go to our website. I think we're getting pretty good at having it be accessible. You can search on just about any keyword you want and spread the word. We are on Facebook, we tweet, we try to be engaged in the social media, but our primary way of participating is to make citizens, and largely through the media, aware of what the facts are.
Carol Kellermann, President of the Citizens Budget Commission, and thank you for joining us on this edition of CityWide. Send your comments and suggestions to CityWide at CUNY-TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or contact us at CUNY.TV.